2 trucks have left, 2 more have entered. What's going on, everyone? Episode 4 of Flip That Truck. Up to this point, we've finished, well, technically 3 trucks, but they kind of turned into 2. This is truck 4 of the season. Truck 5 you saw in the very first video, but hasn't made a return. But since the first couple of completed trucks have left and been sold off, I needed to replace them, and I found a couple of deals to do so. So this week, I'm going to go over the 2 new additions to the series, as well as try and wrap up the LC70. So that's our plan for this week. With the LC70, my plan is to get the interior designed, constructed, and the electronics sorted. That is the last things left on this truck before it can also go. So hoping to get that done by the end of this video. Let's hope that that happens. But before we get into what it's going to take to get that completed, let's go over the 2 new vehicles that have entered. We're gonna start with this Yeti. Now, typically an axial Yeti, not a vehicle I would be interested in, but when someone messaged me and asked if I was interested, I said send pictures, and I figured I would take a look. What could it hurt? And I'm glad that I did that, because this is what was shown. And from the outside, it looks like just a Proline VW Bug on top of a Yeti. But what you don't see is how nice this truck is. But that's the real question here, because this truck it's kind of perfect. It showed up today, and I started to take a look at it, and I got some photos that weren't super detailed, but they looked good, from what I could see. So I asked the gentleman what the price was, and he told me a price that I just couldn't refuse, so I had to buy it. I picked up this Yeti for $300, which I was just it was worth the risk. Let's do it. Let's see it. Because from what I saw in the photos, there's no way I could lose money if it showed up. And it showed up, and it was exactly as the photos showed. So I can't say enough about how good of a deal this really turned out to be. The Proline body on the Yeti cage was done pretty well. It's fastened in a couple of areas. This is all paint on this body. Granted, it's a single white color, but it's got Axial painted on the side and a Vanquish logo painted on the hood. And it's got a Vanquish logo painted on because there's a lot of Vanquish in this truck. If you look underneath of this, we've got a Vanquish shock tower and shock adjuster, as well as Incision stainless steel front links, the Vanquish caster blocks and knuckles. It's got upgraded Icon axial shocks up front. It does have the axial universal shafts, has the Vanquish steering rack and the bell crank setup. It's a tactic servo, so basically, is stock there. It's got a Vanquish motor plate and motor cam. It's got an upgraded castle system. This is the Sidewinder SCT, and I haven't looked at what the kV of the motor is yet. Everything is wired really cleanly. It's got actually a little distribution block here on the side, which was done well. Just everything on this truck was done exceptionally well. I mean, it's clean. The wires are fairly managed. Some of it needs a couple of zip ties so it doesn't get into the spur gear. But this is one of those ones that it showed up today, and I was just like, okay. There's almost nothing that this thing needs, because here in the back is where the rest of the story gets even better. It's got a centered Vanquish Curry rock jock rear axle that is brand new. There's not a scratch on the skid plate that wraps around the bottom side of this. It's got Vanquish aluminum trailing arms, the Vanquish sway bar, and Vanquish titanium upper links. It has an MIP rear center drive shaft. That alone was not inexpensive. The person that built this just did a really good job, and there's absolutely nothing that this needs. So by the nature of this series, though, it's just like, well, there's nothing for me to do other than just try and sell it for a profit, which is the nature of the series. But normally that includes doing some work. This time, it's just not the case. I'll link his Instagram and his YouTube because he did a good job building this. Maybe he does a good job at creating content as well. I don't know what else to say about this thing. There is a lot of people locally who still run, race, and build Yetis into some custom vehicles. And I know that some of them were looking for Yetis. So I feel like this might be just like the ultimate perfect rig for one of those guys. So I can do that. I don't have to spend the money on shipping, and then any profit that I can make on this, I can benefit from without having to, you know, expend some of it in the shipping costs, because this is the easiest truck and flip that truck has ever seen. But unless one of the local guys just isn't in need, this one probably won't hit the website. In and out. Let's see the next one though. This is what I had on the bench at the start of this video. And if you can't tell, this is an Element Gatekeeper kind of roller-esque, not slider, but without a transmission. Either way, this I picked up for 80 bucks. It's got axle shocks and the Gatekeeper suspension stuff. Although the only reason that I picked this up is because I needed something to drop into this, which is a tube chassis that I picked up for 50 bucks. It's not complete, it still needs work. There's no panel nuts, and some of the tube work itself is incomplete, needs some modification. But this is a really inexpensive tube chassis that's got a pretty unique design that I actually like. So my plan is to transplant as much of this into this truck as I can. And if you remember, I had that SCX-10-1 from earlier in the series that I got from Dan in the Bay Area, and I still had one of those transmissions left over from those two SCX-10-1s that came together. So since this was missing a transmission, that trans find its way in here. Bob's your uncle. I think this one's going to take a little bit of work, so you're probably going to see this one, you know, kind of work its way into the series as it goes. A little bit more of a project than some of the others, but for only having 130 bucks into the combination of, you know, the axles, links, shocks, and this custom chassis, I think it'll work out. I think this thing will be an exceptionally good looking little setup when it's done. I think it's going to come a long way from what you see here to the final project. But that's enough of the new vehicles. Now let's get into wrapping up our LC70.
As we begin this post-race show, and it is, of course, Carlos Sainz, who is your... But it didn't matter in the end. Mick was just explaining his battle with members over on Thursday, and it just feels like a great job, Mick. Congratulations. Charles, 49 points down coming into the race. Charles had no problem in play, but they could have won it. They lost the momentum. The tire was not on the podium, deservedly so.
The LC70 is officially wrapped up. The finishing of this was, it took a lot of little steps and then some big ones as well, but the interior was the biggest project. I did use the 3D scanner as I showed in the last episode to kind of scan the inside of this body, give me a good contour base, and it allowed me to make a dash that just really perfectly fit this LC70 interior. You can see it in there a little bit, you know, it's got an actual curve to it that matches the curve of the windshield. Give it a little bit more depth. I'll upload that file in case maybe you have an LC70 and you'd like a dash. It was a pretty simple one. So I'll throw that up on my Thingiverse and I'll link that below. Again, maybe you have one, maybe you're looking for a simple 3D printable dash. Then if you can see in there, well, look at that giant sunroof makes it handy, but you can see that floor in there, which is black, but that's actually some very thin 0.025 thick aluminum sheet that is bent in a U channel and then notched out for the transmission transfer case area to come through. I bent it around. It attaches to the underside of the dash with 2 screws, and then it attaches to the back side of the cab with some double-sided adhesive tape. Just something simple that holds it in place. 3D printed a couple of seats, which it's a model that I use all the time. It is also available on my Thingiverse already. It's actually in the Sim Racer seat collection. I made like a little Sim Racer that you could use as a phone holder. but you can find that seat in that collection. I scale it all the time for different projects, width, height, length, whatever it is, to just make it fit properly into the projects that I was after. One thing that I did change is that the interior is now mounted to the body. So it stays with the body rather than going on the chassis. The previous one was this piece, and it kind of just clipped down over the upper link screws, and it was made out of some thin styrene with some aluminum bent seats. Got the job done, but I wanted something that looked just a little bit better. So out with the old and in with the newer. So that's done. You can see there those 2 points that the underside of the dash actually mounts with. I did also purchase some new 90mm limit straps for the rear. The old ones were this, which I think is like shoelace or something along that, but it had ripped through one of these. Well, there's not an eyelet. They just put a screw through it. Maybe they heated it to try and get it to kind of make a little bit more of a secure mounting, but they didn't really hold up. So I bought some proper ones with aluminum ends and stitched. So the front ones are a little bit nicer quality. These, now they match. The rear axle on the upper links, it used a couple of really long screws, one that went in from each end, and then they just barely touched in the center of that axle truss there. And it was a little bit, I was concerned about it because those screws go in, like I said, they barely went into that center portion, and I was worried that they would stretch or break the plastic itself. So I picked up some of this 3mm all thread. Oftentimes it's hard to find 3mm, but I found this on Amazon. I cut a piece to length and I ran it all the way through, used the spacers and lock nuts on both sides then, so that I could put everything in there and it's one long screw. Now it is stainless, so there is the possibility that you could still bend something like this, especially with the leverage that it has. But this truck was built with this link geometry to make sure everything cleared. So I wanted to maintain the link geometry because I believe that this truck did perform pretty well. So didn't want to mess that up. I just wanted to make it put together a little bit more solid. You already saw all of the other upgrades that we made. The one thing after getting the interior wrapped up was the electronics. I was told when I bought this that there was something funky with the electronics. I changed the battery plug over to an XT60, and then I was able to hook up one of my 3S batteries, and I used one of my servo testers or signal generators, whatever you want to call it, powered by a receiver pack. And I was able to just plug it into the individual components. The ESC itself and test the motion of it forward and reverse worked fine. Plugged it into the steering servo. Quick, snappy steering servo, no problem there. Then I plugged it into the winch and we had nothing. Couldn't get it to work at all, and started to investigate. I noticed that it was using a little servo board as the winch controller, and it had a really bad connection on the ground side of the power. Thought maybe that was the issue. The ground side actually came off while I was trying to fiddle with it. So I got that off, ended up removing it completely from the ESC, and then just powering this winch controller off of a 3S battery and trying to use the signal generator to make the winch move. I got nothing at all. So I was like, well, maybe it's just the controller. So I bypassed the controller completely and I just direct powered the servo winch itself by just hooking this straight up to a 3S battery, which probably, which is more power than these things would normally run on, especially through a servo board. But trying that, and I could hear it try to click over, but it was almost like it was bound up. Maybe there's a bad gear set in this, but probably won't find out because after trying to test it for, I don't know, maybe 15 seconds, that was evidently too long though, and I saw a little bit of smoke come out. So it's donezo completely, which that's fine. I'm not that concerned. Figured we'll get this one out of there, and I dug through my box of parts and I ended up having a power shift stubby winch, which I was super happy that I had because I had it brand new, never used, and a power shift winch controller, something that I was just positive was going to work perfectly, which I wired up, resoldered that connector onto the ESC, and we were good to go. This winch works perfectly. It's a little bit smaller, so it's got better clearance yet for the underside. I noticed that there was a magnet already installed on the back side of this body here, And when I went to test it, I noticed that the winch hook that was on here was actually plastic or Delrin. And I was like, oh, well, that's not gonna work. It doesn't. So I switched over to a steel Reefs RC hook, which the reason that I'm noting that or telling you that specifically and mentioning that magnet is that it is super handy to have a steel winch hook, because you can drop it down and it will just snap right onto there and it's held well. But that way when you're on course, you can just grab it, hook up to the land anchor or winch stick, whatever you're doing, then unhook it and just drop it down and it'll hold itself in place. Then if the truck is, on the train, it doesn't fall off. It's a nice thing. I notice a lot of guys use it. I always be like, yeah, that's a really good idea. I should put that on one of my trucks, and then I never do. But this one has it. So how easy is that? That's gonna do it 100% for this rig. Now, normally, once these trucks are finished up, ready to go, I sell them. That's normally the plan, right? The whole purpose of this series. However, this time, this one, possibly a little bit different. Earlier in the series, when I had posted this up, someone had messaged me and offered me a trade, which I liked the look of their trade. We went back and forth, showed the progress to them as we go. And at this point, I'm going to either finalize that trade with that gentleman and send this truck off in exchange for his, or if he doesn't want the truck, then it will find its way onto the website. So you're gonna have to wait to see what happens there. If you don't know, I list these trucks for sale on my website, which is harleydesigns.com. There's a for sale section, and that's where they're listed. Go check out what's for sale if you're interested, maybe especially if this is a video that was produced a while ago and you're just watching now, because maybe there's something new for sale. But that should be the last time you see this ugly little Toyota here on this channel. It was a fun one. I enjoyed this little rehab. Just maybe I'll have to build myself an LC70 again in the future. But next, this project is going to hit the bench. Again, super cheap cage. I think I paid like, what, 50 bucks for this thing. And the $80 Gatekeeper slider-esque. This little project's gonna be fun. I'm gonna try and be as efficient as possible with the amount of work that I throw into it, but it's gonna involve a little bit of cutting and grinding and welding, possibly, probably, but in the end, it could be pretty cool. Need to come up with the theme for this truck. Amazon delivery truck, we'll paint it the gray color. Some options, right? Let me know if you guys have any suggestions on ridiculously unrelated themes that we could put on here. Also in the next episode, we're gonna get to work on the Jeep tube bouncer project. First step is going to be getting the powder coat stripped off. So we're gonna try that aircraft stripper. Hopefully that works. Otherwise, probably gonna have to send this thing off to be stripped. Looking forward to both of these though. I love tube projects. Maybe you guys know that, maybe you didn't. Either way, hope you're enjoying Flip That Truck. This episode's a couple days late because of the 4th of July, but right back to it. So hit the like button if you enjoy these. Drop a comment, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, do all the things, just right down the line. Appreciate you guys for watching. See you on the next one.